It was just after sunrise in Fernley, Nevada, when 18-year-old Naomi Irion's life was about to change forever. She wasn't out partying. She wasn't meeting up with strangers. She was simply waiting for her morning bus in a Walmart parking lot, when a man she'd never met climbed into her car and drove away. And Naomi never came home. On the morning of March 12, 2022, Naomi parked in her usual spot before 5:15 a.m. This was part of her routine. She'd sit for a few minutes scrolling on her phone, passing the time until the shuttle took her to work. The parking lot was quiet, almost empty. But this time, a man was lurking nearby, pacing, watching, calculating. Moments later, surveillance cameras would capture him slipping into the driver's seat of Naomi's car. He didn't threaten her in public. He didn't drag her out. Instead, in a move so quick it was almost casual, he shut the door and drove away with her inside. In those seconds, a young woman's future, and the lives of everyone who loved her, were thrown into chaos. When Naomi didn't come home that day, her family knew something was wrong. Her brother, Casey, couldn't shake the feeling. Naomi always stayed in touch, always answered her phone. Now there was nothing. No replies to friends. No bank account activity. No sign she had gone to work. And yet, when he called the sheriff's office, they told him she was an adult, and adults have the right to disappear. But Casey refused to accept that. This wasn't like Naomi. He convinced Walmart security to check the cameras, and what they saw confirmed their worst fears. The stranger had taken her. No struggle, no escape, just gone. From that moment on, it was a race against time. A desperate search for Naomi Irion, and a hunt for the man whose calm, calculated abduction would reveal a history far darker than anyone imagined. Naomi Irion was still new to life in the United States. Her family had lived all over the world because of her father's work with the State Department, sheltered communities in Russia, Germany, and South Africa. A year earlier, they had finally settled in Nevada, hoping for a quieter, more stable life. Naomi was independent but close to her family. She loved music, chatting with her siblings, and was excited to build her future here. She worked long hours, often taking early morning shifts. That's why the Walmart parking lot became a regular stop. The bus would pick her up there and take her to her job. On that March morning, her parents were thousands of miles away in Africa. They had no idea that their daughter's final moments of safety were playing out in a parking lot half a world away. It would be hours before anyone realized she had vanished. Hours that, in a kidnapping, can mean everything. Her brother Casey became the first to act. That night, when Naomi didn't return home, he called law enforcement. The deputy on the phone didn't treat it as urgent. An 18-year-old can go where she wants, they said. But Casey knew better. He had grown up with Naomi, seen her habits, and understood when something was off. The next day, he went straight to Walmart. After tracking down store security, he convinced them to search the surveillance footage. They combed through hours of recordings until finally, the moment appeared on screen. A man pacing near the lot, then slipping into Naomi's car and driving away. She never got out. That grainy footage was all they had, no license plate, no name, just the chilling certainty that someone had taken Naomi, and whoever he was still out there. The man in the footage was a stranger to Naomi, but not to the criminal justice system. His name was Troy Driver, and his past was a long, violent record. Long before he appeared in that Walmart lot, he'd served 15 years for armed robbery, burglary, and violent assault. His criminal history dated back to when he was just 14 years old, starting with animal cruelty. On March 12, 2022, Troy's movements were deliberate. Investigators would later learn that he arrived at the parking lot just minutes before Naomi. He lingered, pacing, studying the area. When the opportunity came, he slid into her car and took control, driving away as if it was just another errand. What happened next remains partially hidden in gaps between surveillance cameras and phone pings, but evidence shows that Troy did not take Naomi home or to a public place. Instead, he drove her toward the Nevada desert. Isolated, quiet, and unforgiving. Detectives believe Naomi was held for hours, maybe even days. A witness later told police Troy had spoken about keeping her in such good condition that she looked alive in photographs, as if that was something to be proud of. He even staged her holding a newspaper, wearing makeup, in what sounded disturbingly like a ransom photo. Back in Fernley, Naomi's family was working around the clock to find her. They were putting up flyers, contacting the media, and combing through any lead they could find. But Troy was already thinking ahead. He replaced the tires on his truck, deleted security footage at home, and tried to erase traces of what he'd done. What he didn't know was that his every attempt to hide would eventually become a trail of evidence, and that one mistake would put his face on investigators' radar. Once detectives had the Walmart footage, their next mission was to identify the truck seen driving away with Naomi inside. They studied every detail, the shape of the cab, the paint color, even minor dents. That search led them to a name, Troy Driver. At first glance, Troy tried to appear like an ordinary worker in a mining town, but a background check told a different story. His rap sheet stretched back decades, filled with violence, theft, and time behind bars. When deputies visited his home, they noticed he seemed calm, too calm for someone under suspicion in a kidnapping case. Phone records suggested he'd been at home during parts of the day Naomi disappeared, but investigators weren't convinced. His devices showed unusual inactivity. Troy was normally a heavy phone user, yet during key hours there was nothing, no calls, no texts, no searches. It was as if he'd gone dark. Surveillance cameras would soon close the gap. In one critical frame, Troy's truck passed directly in front of a security camera. There was no mistaking it, the same vehicle from the Walmart footage. It was the proof detectives needed to move in. On March 25th, nearly 2 weeks after Naomi vanished, a SWAT team surrounded Troy Driver's location. The arrest was quick, but tense. Officers seized firearms from his property and began questioning him. Troy denied knowing where Naomi was. He gave clipped answers, avoided eye contact, and tried to downplay his past. But while he stayed silent, others spoke. Troy's girlfriend, Zelma, revealed disturbing details. How he had erased home surveillance videos, replaced truck tires, and acted jumpy whenever news of Naomi's case came on. The more she talked, the more pieces began to fit together. Now, the case shifted from finding a suspect to finding Naomi, and time was running out. Part 5, Act 3. Trial and Verdict. The break came when investigators followed Troy's mining connections. He worked in remote areas, places where heavy equipment dug deep into the earth, leaving behind vast, hidden spaces. One co-worker remembered him remarking that you could hide a body here and no one would ever find it. Acting on a hunch, detectives traced the path of an excavator used near one of Troy's job sites. In a quiet patch of desert, they found a shallow, unmarked grave. On March 29th, over 2 weeks since Naomi was last seen, the grave was exhumed. Inside were human remains. 2 days later, the medical examiner confirmed what Naomi's family had feared. It was her. She had been shot in the back of the head, and again in the chest. The autopsy and DNA evidence tied Troy directly to her death. Investigators also learned that after killing Naomi, he burned her clothing, some of his own clothes, and other incriminating items to destroy evidence. With the evidence stacked against him, prosecutors filed a long list of charges, including kidnapping, murder, sexual assault, and destruction of evidence. The court also heard about his history of violence, painting a picture of a man who had been dangerous for decades. Troy never showed much emotion in court. No apologies, no visible regret. But the weight of the case was undeniable. The DNA, the surveillance footage, the witness statements all pointed to one conclusion. The trial ended with a guilty verdict. For Naomi's family, there was no sense of celebration, only a quiet relief that Troy Driver would never walk free again. He was sentenced to life, ensuring he would never have another chance to harm anyone else. But the story didn't end at the verdict. Naomi's loved ones were still left to pick up the pieces, and for them, the hardest part was just beginning. Part 6, Act 3, Aftermath and Reflection. When the gavel came down on the guilty verdict, Naomi's family didn't feel triumph. They felt a small, fragile piece of closure. They had spent every waking hour for weeks searching, calling, pleading for answers. Now there was no more search to be done. Naomi was gone. The only thing left was to make sure her story would never be forgotten. Casey, her brother, spoke about how everything else in his life had been pushed aside to fight for justice. Once Troy Driver was in custody and Naomi had been found, he tried to live in a way that would make her proud, focusing on kindness, resilience, and honoring her memory. Troy, even behind bars, still tried to reach out. Months after his arrest, he sent a chilling letter to his ex-girlfriend, smuggled out inside a deck of cards. It was an unsettling reminder that his manipulative nature hadn't gone away, but at least now he could no longer act on it. Naomi's mother described the loss as a wound that will never fully heal. The family has to live with the knowledge of how her life ended, but also with the gratitude for the community, law enforcement, and volunteers who helped bring her home. For investigators, the case was a grim reminder of how quickly an ordinary morning can turn into tragedy. It showed the importance of acting fast, trusting instincts, and never dismissing a missing person report just because the victim is legally an adult. Naomi's name is now part of a larger conversation about safety, awareness, and the silent predators who watch for opportunity. Her story is both a warning and a call for compassion, proof that in moments of danger, even the smallest action from a determined friend, family member, or stranger can make a difference. In the end, Troy Driver will spend the rest of his life in prison. But Naomi's story, her kindness, her hope for the future, and the fight to bring her home, will outlast him.